Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. Of course, I am your host, Todd Rosales. This is our second episode this week, second of three. Tune in tomorrow for another episode, always at 6:30 p.m. right here at facebook.com/Cannabusiness Group. Hope you really enjoyed our episode yesterday with Dr. Stuart Titus. Very educational, very forward-thinking. Was great. Always great when we have a real medical professional on here, especially talking about the endocannabinoid system and why it's not taught in medical schools and all that great stuff. Of course, check out our recorded episodes that we dropped this week. We've got Dan Berman from Cannabis BPO. We've got Amy Renault and Nico Dilly from HBK. And then we've got Dr. Chandra Macias, which was a great conversation. You can check those out at youtube.com/elevate your grind. We've got some panels coming up. That's on me for not knowing when those are. I think the next one is next week. It's going to be on staffing in the cannabis industry. But of course, if you ever want to figure those out as easily as I can, you can go to joinclab.com to find out all that information. All right. Let's see. What do we have next week? Do we need to get into next week? No, we are good. Next week is Thanksgiving week, right? Yeah, next week is Thanksgiving week. We have one interview that's going to be on Tuesday with Sparky Rose of Super Critical. It's going to be an awesome conversation. Sparky is he had one of the first 4 licenses in Oakland, along with another person that we know, Steve D'Angelo. So it's going to be a great conversation to see another one of the original 4 in Oakland talk about what he's doing and his experiences coming up in the cannabis space. Really excited about that one. But our guest today, he was one of the first people that I met in cannabis, especially when I used to be on the finance side of things. We worked together, we did an event together, kept in touch, just kind of had similar tracks to the cannabis industry. And now, the negative things in our life turned into positive things. And here we are sitting together on this podcast. So for those of you who may or may not know him, please welcome my guest today, Stephen Ernest, one of the, I would say, co-founders and managing partners of Sharp Capital Advisors. Steve, welcome to the show, man.
Todd, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, bud.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for staying in your office, that lovely large office you have with nobody else in it, just for us.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to kind of break up the monotony that is 2020. So even though I'm here alone, it's nice to have a break from the home life.
It looks like a very beautiful place to be in your own right now. It's a gorgeous office, man. You're moving up in the world.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's right here in the heart of River North, which is, one of Chicago's most beautiful neighborhoods, and actually home to 5 of the biggest multi-state operators in cannabis.
So you go to Starbucks and all those places just to listen to some insider info. I see how it goes, man.
Well, maybe if it was not 2020, that would be possible. But yes.
Very, very, very true, man. So give us a little bit. So I met you back in the day when you were with Viridian, and you've since moved on to bigger and better things. I say that because you're a managing partner, you're a co-founder, and it's always great to kind of do things on your own. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Sharp. And then, of course, we're going to run this like a movie and go back to the beginning about how you fell into cannabis.
Sure. Yeah, great question. So Sharp Capital Advisors is a boutique advisory group serving exclusively the cannabis industry. So it consists of 3 partners, myself, Rebecca Hawkinson, who has a 15-year background in commercial real estate and financing complex real estate projects, which obviously is something that is very sought after and necessary to grow the industry. And then our CEO and fearless leader, Steve Miles, who is actually the co-founder of Livingstone Partners, which is an international middle market investment bank that's headquartered here out of Chicago. So our office is actually, we're on the 4th floor, so above from Livingstone Partners. Livingstone Partners typically does sell-side mergers and acquisitions, so working with family-owned businesses and private equity groups to represent sell-side assignments all across the middle market. And Steve Miles, my business partner, was kind of poking around in the industry for a couple of years, and said, "Wow, this is kind of perfect for our business." They raise debt and equity and do sell-side assignments. And when he looked at the massive fragmentation in the cannabis industry, he's like, this is something that we obviously have to get involved in. This is kind of the bread and butter of what he does. So it's an international firm. So there's partners in Beijing and in Dusseldorf and places that just cannabis as an industry doesn't necessarily exist, or not at least in a robust enough manner for them to jump in. So we decided to launch a sister firm, call it Sharp Capital Advisors, and think of us kind of as an origination house for the broader bank of Livingstone. So we're going to bring the deals in, and then obviously under my purview of somebody who's been banking the cannabis industry professionally for 5 years now, we're going to pursue sell-side M&A assignments, debt and equity raises.
Very cool, man. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is needed in the cannabis space, right? I think you need a sophisticated finance background to be able to navigate the nuances of cannabis compliance. I need the sophisticated background to navigate that sentence, apparently. But with the way that cannabis is, with federal illegality, you really need to get creative, I think, with a lot of your deal structures. You bring up real estate and everything else. So it's funny. There is on the ground floor in cannabis, there's a sentiment that they don't want the bankers in this business, right? But at the end of the day, there are good bankers. Not everybody is the evil Wall Street kind, but it's the complexity and the uniqueness of the deal structure that you all can look at that's going to make this industry move forward, right? It's not just straight equity plays anymore. There's so much more to it. So, I think the experience that you guys bring to the industry is certainly needed. But let's go back to you, man. You obviously didn't start your career in cannabis. You come from the finance side.
No.
What brought? I mean, at least that I know about. I don't know what you're growing in your backyard or your closet. But on that note, how did you find yourself in this space? Was this a place that you wanted to get into, or is it just you happened? There's three camps of people. There are people who absolutely wanted to get into the space, the people who fell into this space, and then the people who just, I don't even remember what the third camp was, but they have something that affects their life from a personal standpoint, and they fall back into the first camp and they want to get into this space. So what was your story?
Yeah, I'm kind of a combination of all three. So as somebody who's been naturally just drawn to the plant since I was a young adult, I kind of always knew, or at least sensed, that there was a pretty large delta between the perceived risk and the actual risk when it came to this particular substance. So I started my career at JP Morgan, working more on the wealth management side, but with a lot of the groups that ended up investing into the space, private equity groups, family offices, ultra high net worth investors. So I started getting questions about, how do I invest in this space in 2013 and 14 and 15. And I was like, if anyone would know, it's me, right? I'm like, my job is to scour the earth for investment opportunities for the wealthiest, Americans and Chicagoans. I haven't seen anything, it was like Medbox, some, penny stock. And you're just like,
yeah,
I was like, you can't invest in that, right? And working at JP Morgan, it was so far below the bar. I mean, I legally couldn't even talk about it, but it sparked my interest, right? So I started looking into the space, and that's when I met my previous business partner, Sumit Mehta from Mazakali, who was working at JP Morgan at the time, and he was good friends with the Daytons, Jeff and Troy Dayton, who founded the Parkview Group. So I met these guys, and then they introduced me to somebody you just mentioned, Steve D'Angelo. And I realized, okay, this is not just a movement. This is an actual industry. I mean, there were dispensaries, at the time, Harborside, I think, was doing like $40 million a year. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. So there's actual business, serious business and financial investment opportunity. And I ended up making my first investment in 2015. And I just kind of fell in love with the industry. It just kind of had there was a social justice component. It was all based on a movement, right? It was half industry, it was half activism and movement. So you were really doing well by doing good. And I think I was really drawn to the thought that I can, capitalize on this. This could be a potentially really lucrative opportunity, but I also have the opportunity to really help people and actually impact change through financings. So
it's nice when that aligns, isn't it? Where you can,
where else does
listen. at the end of the day, this is where my gripes come from. The people that talk about not having the bankers and the business people in here is nothing. You're never going to be more excited about something than something where you can make it your profession. You're going to make a lot of money doing it. And you also get to help people and do something you care about. That's like the perfect intersection of life, because you're going to take every single ounce of your energy and focus on it, because everything that you want to accomplish in life, there's a lot of executives that do a lot of nonprofit work, but at the end of the day, there's a mind split there. It's what do I do during the day and what do I do at night? By you being in this industry, and I didn't mean to cut you off there, I'm very good at that. You get to pick I don't say you get to pick who's getting funded and who's not, but you can advocate for the right companies that have social justice components to it, that are minority led or anything along those lines, and make sure that those companies get the recognition that they deserve. And in that sense of the word, you almost have your professional life and your nonprofit or your charitable life intersecting right at where your job is. And to me, there's nothing better than that. I think if everybody could have a social equity component or a charitable component to what they do every day, this would be a much better place. So I know I cut you off, but it's just stuff that I get excited about.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And my ethos is very much so aligned with my business partners, Stephen and Rebecca, who both happen to be involved in this organization called Build Chicago. Which is basically it's gang intervention. They go into the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, and they help do after school programs and education tracks for kids, and really just trying to keep kids off the streets, out of gangs. And when I think about the social equity component of cannabis and the general war on drugs and sort of the harm that it is caused to so many communities, it's pretty incredible to think about the opportunity that we have here to create 50 to 100 billion dollars of revenue in this country alone over the next 10 years. We're talking about extremely significant numbers here. So not only do you have that tax revenue coming in and with a real purpose for social equity like we have here in Illinois, which is one of the strongest programs, but you're also taking hundreds of thousands of people out of prison. The war on drugs, I think the DPIA estimates it's a $44 billion cost to just try to fight this. So, you have an industry here that I think is unique in the respect that it's truly moving from vice to impact. And I can't think of another industry that I've studied that has made that transition.
No, you're 100% right. Going from vice to impact. It's funny that cannabis, until recently, a Schedule I drug is looked at as just that, a drug, something harmful to you, something that's going to ruin your life. And now that the stigma has kind of been washed away, it skipped over everything to wellness product, right? So it's not like it went from drug to like what alcohol is. It's like, no, this is now a wellness product. So it's incredible that all of a sudden something that the federal government says has no medical benefit whatsoever is now being sold as a dietary supplement and a wellness product, right? That's what blows my mind.
Yeah, and to your second point is kind of the experiential catalyst of joining the industry, where you either have an illness or meet somebody. When you get into the industry, you start to meet these folks, and when you meet kids who have intractable epilepsy and realize that the only thing that stops these kids from having 100 seizures a day is something like a Charlotte's Web or an Epidiolex, right? A cannabinoid-based medicine. You look at it in a different lens, and I think that's really been shown by the American public with the perception over time. I think I read a poll, it's like a Gallup poll, it was like 70% in support. I mean, that's insane. What else has 70% support? And that went from 30% support 10 years ago. So you're seeing the perception change with these real life healing examples.
See, I don't know if it happens to you, but I can tell you, like, when I first got into the cannabis industry, I'd be hesitant to talk about it, but then eventually, obviously, it's hard for me to hide them in the cannabis space. I've got 100 freaking episodes on Facebook now, but
you're in it.
Yeah. But when I go to a networking event that is outside of a cannabis networking event, I become like the popular kid in high school. Like, people are surrounded. What's it like? What do you guys do? Tell me about it. I know someone who got into that. Right. And it's weird where you would think that where some people would look at you and say, oh, you work in cannabis? It's like, yeah, that's a drug dealer over there, right? Where all of a sudden I've got bankers and financial advisors and IT guys and marketing people just reaching out to me like, hey, we want to get a piece of this cannabis industry. What are you doing? Tell us about it. And it's weird that something that you would have been shunned for 5 years ago is now opening doors, right? I don't know if you have that same experience, but.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so actually I made my first investment in 2015 when I was still working at JP Morgan. And I actually ended up basically getting ostracized from the financial industry because I was told I had to divest from my cannabis investments, which were all ancillary, by the way. But it was like impossible. I'm like, okay, so how am I going to divest from these? It was a seed stage, Canopy Boulder. It's like a seed stage business accelerator. Like, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I hit a crossroad where the stigma, kind of forced me into it. So to your, I think it was your third point, right? So it was, a mixture of seeing the patient, seeing actual patients, seeing them, the medicinal movement behind it, the stigma that kind of, makes you have this binary choice, right? It's like you're either in that drug dealer camp, right, or you're a real, professional, and the reality couldn't be further from the truth, right? Yeah. And the third thing that you meant, there's an industry advantage here, and especially for folks who are, our age, right, younger professionals. When I was working at JP Morgan, there was a guy next to my office. He was 88 years old. He'd been doing this for 60 years. I was like, from an experience perspective, I'm like looking down the barrel of a, 6-decade uphill slog. And I look at cannabis and I'm like, okay, well, yes. Is it a nascent industry? Of course. Is there a robust opportunity right now? Definitely not compared to what I was doing at JP Morgan. But I always had the confidence that I would fast forward 5 or 10 years and I would be an expert in one of the fastest growing, sexiest industries in the United States. And I don't know another industry that you can, really do that with. I mean, outside of maybe West Coast, tech or Bitcoin, right? But yeah, I saw that opportunity from an industry perspective. So, for me, my transition was kind of a little bit of all three of those camps.
No, that's really interesting. And you make a good point. It's funny. I've been in this industry coming up on 2 years now. And it's funny. I do not consider myself an expert, but when I talk to most people, I have a level of knowledge that they don't have yet. And that just confuses the hell out of me because I'm just like, I've been in this space for 2 years. How do I know more than so many people? And again, maybe it goes back to the 100 episodes, but like you said, 5 years, dude, you're an old pro. I mean, as much, if not more than just about anybody in this industry. And I mean, that's obviously why I wanted to have you on, because you've seen cannabis 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, according to the media, right? Who knows where we actually are. But, it's interesting to see the development of companies over the past 2 years alone, right? Where you have these MSOs that are coming up, and then the original MSOs, they ran out of money. So they're starting to disappear, or they've got negative news around them. And then you're seeing like these deals, at least for me, coming out of nowhere, like Verano acquiring AltMed, right? And becoming one of the largest private cannabis companies in the country. And it's so funny because I want to say 6-8 months ago, I was just walking around and I come up with these, what I think are wild ideas, but I'm just like, there was a company out in Colorado that I was very friendly with that just they had 3 stores in Colorado. They had a grow in Colorado, and they just kind of focused on what they were doing. They focused on becoming profitable. They've now expanded to 9 stores in Colorado through acquisition. They're now expanding to Massachusetts, Missouri, Oklahoma, Michigan. They're looking at other states. And I always thought, that's the MSO of the future, the people that focused on their state and they just focused on making money, like old school business principles. And now they're taking advantage. They follow tradition. They didn't try to be Uber. They didn't try to get to be $100 billion company that was operating at a loss. They tried to become profitable, pay their investors and everything else. And that's what we're starting to see. So for someone like me, I don't have a traditional finance background. I got into it from the marketing side and then learned the business. It's funny to me to see this, what I thought, I'm like, yeah, I was just talking to people. I'm like, it sounds good enough that people will think that I'm smart by saying that, but it's actually happening now. So it's crazy to see that happening. I mean, you've probably seen all of it. You saw the initial MSOs come up. You're seeing, what are you excited like for Sharp? Are you guys looking for those under the radar players that are just quietly expanding beyond their borders and doing M&A that way?
So we kind of break it down into, or think about it in a few tiers. So, we think of it as kind of 3 tiers of MSOs. You've got the big ones, right? You've got your Trulies, your Curaleafs, your GTIs, your Crescos, your $1 billion plus market cap companies. This tier 1 are the ultimate. These are the acquirers and ultimately the investors, because when you think about the asset class of cannabis being, a 10 out of 10 as far as risk goes as a result of its nascency.
Yeah.
You want to shift at least to 9.1 instead of 9.9. So investors can actually get behind the collateral package of a giant multi-state operator with actual cash flows, EBITDA, licenses, real estate that actually has value. So that's your tier 1. Your tier 2, that's your PharmaCanna, your Verano, obviously as a leader now. Your Parallels, who are coming up, and they've got a huge private footprint, and they're raising money in the private markets, who are likely either going to go public or get acquired by some enormous company. So they're the ones that need to try to raise capital, look to continue to acquire, or merge into one of these big ones. I mean, Verano and AltMed, that was I think the biggest merger that was announced this year. And then you have the tier 3. Those are the ones who have maybe a couple of states, really good at winning licenses, have a little bit of infrastructure there, and ultimately right now they just need to raise capital to build out all of the opportunities that they have. But the capital all flows in from the top. So it's Sharp. We want to work with the companies that are ultimately going to be selling into the tier 1, tier 2 companies and represent the tier 3, and then the single state operators, right? Like you said, who have the maniacal focus of profitability and fundamentals within their market.
Crazy
and really understand it. The thing that I think people don't understand when they come into this is the regulatory fragmentation and complexity. Because you can't just have one dispensary in another state, because the reality is it's a whole new regulatory regime that you have to navigate on a daily basis. So if like we saw this with MedMen, and we saw this with Ianthus, right? They went out there, they press released a bunch of acquisitions because their stock got a boost from an increased footprint, and they never focused on fundamentals. So what they had then were these 10 plus state footprints that they just couldn't possibly manage. They weren't profitable. When the capital was sucked out of the industry, they had to make really hard decisions. I mean, some of the debt packages, it's I don't want to say it's predatory, because they ultimately can't really access bankruptcy courts. So you have to come up with these ad hoc solutions, but they're in fire drills now, and they're extremely disadvantaged as a result. MedMen has some incredible assets. But they have to sell a lot of them off now, because they need to try to get to a break-even point. And it just, you lose so much time when you do that, right? When you focus on your state, like look at Truly, right? The kind of the golden child, I guess, of the United States operators. They just focus on Florida.
67 retail locations as of today in Florida.
Yeah, it's incredible. And they also, I think it was 67 million in EBITDA for the quarter. These guys they're just pumping it out. And I listened to the call with Kim Rivers, and they're just focused, right? They're just like, this is our state. This is exactly what we're going to do. And they have made some acquisitions, and they're building on top of that. But I think that was the right approach, right? Focus on your core strategic states, build density, acquire where you guys are profitable and understand the market, divest from the areas that are not core strategic focuses for you, and ultimately look for the market to improve from a market capitalization perspective, and then have cash come into the industry. And you're going to see a plethora of acquisitions and mergers. I think 2021 is going to be a hallmark here for financing in the cannabis industry, because of the general lull that we've seen over the last 2.
I hope so. I really do. I know a lot of money flooded into this space, and then it kind of dried up, and people I never thought it dried up. I always just assumed it got smarter, right? That people were just throwing money at anything that had cannabis on it, right? When the cannabis industry first came around, you had people looking at it like technology, and I think companies like MedMen, and I've shit on them, and I can't say anything because I certainly haven't accomplished what their founders have, and
Right.
both good and bad. But I think they took very much a tech company approach where you could operate at losses and you can have big losses to gain market share. But at the end of the day, this is it's a cross between agriculture and CPG, right? It's your product takes time. It's not just like a development sprint where in a few days you can have a new feature, right? You have to wait 60, 90 days, however long the grow process is for your product to come out. Then there's processing time, there's logistics, shit can go wrong. There could be mold, there could be all this stuff, right? So you can't operate like a tech company. And I feel that, the last big industry that we had developed in this country was tech. And you see companies like Uber and Facebook and Twitter, and you have all these multi-billion-dollar companies that are operating at losses, and they have these ridiculous valuations that now when cannabis came around, they're like, well, we can just grab market share, but we worth so much money. But at the end of the day, they're not. And I think that's, to me, was the confusion, because now you see these companies that are coming out and they're getting people from CPG, and they're getting people from agriculture, and they're getting people from those industries and bringing them into the cannabis space. And those businesses are starting to change the way they operate, at least the ones that we're seeing that are being successful now. I don't know where the hell I was going with that point, but I think you kind of dictated a little better than me.
I want to, piggyback off that, and it's to something that
I think I was just waiting for you to take over.
It's to something that you said earlier about the feeling of animosity towards bankers. When I was living in San Francisco, right by the Emerald Triangle, and cannabis Prop 64 passed, right? And it was adult use, and it was everything that we wanted to happen, right? But what you saw happen was you had thousands of these small cultivators, right, who kind of made a living in the mountains of Humboldt and Trinidad, growing cannabis, right? And like, oh, great, this is our opportunity. But the reality is they were business owners in that world. They're not business owners in the new world, right? So I think it's just about understanding like what your role in the space is. And there's no transition without pain, right? There's no growth, right, without challenge. So I think that there's a necessary discomfort that it has to happen within this transition. But ultimately, I don't think that the industry hates bankers. I think that the people who are not, who will not transition successfully to the professional industry that the cannabis industry is becoming may harbor that animosity. But the reality is, when I talk about any of the MSOs really that we've spoken to, I mean, you're talking about guys with 15, 20, 30 years of accounting experience and running CPG companies and retail. I mean, these are real professionals. And when you consider that 20% or so of the population, between 10 and 20%, depending on the geography, consume cannabis, you're going to get, cannabis consuming executives across the board. And those folks who are coming in, they don't hate bankers at all because they're used to working with bankers, right? Yeah. They've worked with bankers their whole lives because they know and understand the complexity of these transactions and the horsepower that an investment bank can bring to a transaction, so that you can ultimately focus on your business and focus on the fundamentals that ultimately we're selling. So yeah, I don't think Cannabis 2.0 hates bankers. I think the folks who can't transition and understand that, maybe you're not a CEO, you're actually a really good cultivator, right? You're the person who's going to be growing all the plants, right? Or maybe you're the person who's testing, right? And yeah, that used to be a business because there was, it was just an illegal thing that you just did and got paid for into the table. That's not the reality. But the reality of professionalizing the industry also sort of ends the war on drugs. So it's a mixed bag, right? You gotta kind of take the good with the bad.
No, it's all about compromise, right? And I understand where they're coming from. It comes from, it was a subculture, and unfortunately they did such a good job with the subculture, it's becoming culture, right? I mean, it's just what it is.
Right, look at Burner.
Exactly. And I had this conversation with Paul Rosen, who's an attorney, and obviously, you have your securities licenses. There was a very big group of us that we were cannabis fans and consumers, but you would lose your entire life and career if you came out and admitted it and if you were public about it, right? I mean, it's just, you couldn't do that. He would have been disbarred. You would lose your licenses. And it's just, we're in a different place now where you have these people who went the corporate route that were in the closet about their cannabis use that are now can come out of the closet and say, hey, I've been using for 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is. And I've been an accountant and I've been this massive CEO. But at the end of the day, when you, like you said, when you have an MSO and you've got 200 employees or 300 employees, a lot of those retail in different states and everything else, it takes a much different skill set than the people who were handling small grows out in the mountains that were just selling out of backpacks or whatever they were versus managing 200 to 300 employees and having payroll and taxes and all this other stuff. It takes a completely different skill set. And if you can marry the guy in the mountains with the guy in the CEO's office, that is the most beautiful relationship that you can have in this industry. And I think 3.0, that's where we are, where, you know, you've got the pure cannabis folks and the business folks that are getting this middle ground. And that's what I'm really excited about, because you have, hey man, I know you're really good at what you do. You're going to focus on growing the best freaking product that you can. And I'm going to make sure you always have a place to come to do that. And I'm going to make sure we make a shit ton of money together. And I'm going to navigate this traditional water that you don't know about because you haven't had to. So I think that's what I'm most excited about for the moving forward here.
Yeah, that's a great point. And somebody else that you mentioned earlier, Sparky Rose, who I actually had in this conference room about a month ago. I mean,
oh, did you? I love Sparky.
Yeah, he's a local Chicago guy, but you know, that's a perfect example of somebody who has all of the. I mean, I don't know anyone who's more connected than Sparky Rose. I mean, the guy's been in the space for like 20 years or something. I mean, an insane amount of time, right? And you know, you really do have to marry that industry experience, understanding this extremely complex and fragmented supply chain, and you know, who can actually help you get things done, who can actually help you, you know, how many master growers have you heard of over your years in the industry, right? It's like everyone's a master grower. It's like, well, what does that mean, right? You need someone like Sparky who can understand, you know, what it actually takes to get 3 pounds per light, right? Or you know, X grams per square foot of canopy, and execute on that, right? The finance guys like me, yeah, I can hop on an earnings call and I can certainly, you know, read that script out. But you know, you need the guys in the greenhouse who can actually get the numbers to come out on the piece of paper. So I agree. I think we need to learn how to marry those two expertise. And you know, one of the things that I think, and shifting to the coronavirus, which I feel like we have to at least cover, is
is that still going on?
Yeah, I heard it is actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, in Illinois, it's crazy. In Chicago, man, they're like hardcore shutdowns now. And we're like stage 4. They're like, do not go see your family for Thanksgiving. I mean, it's pretty intense, but it's largely been great for cannabis, right? We got declared as an essential service. You saw the biggest revenue day of cannabis history when the government told everyone they had to stay home and sent them $1,200. People chose cannabis on that day. So I think that this year has been, although a extremely challenging year for so many people, for so many reasons, and even in the cannabis industry as a result of the capital contraction. But I think when you look back through the lens of history, this is going to be a really pivotal year, because you have a Democratic administration coming into the White House. You've got a Democratic Congress, and you've got the linchpin of the Senate here, right? Which Georgia runoffs, fine. Maybe it's tied. Maybe the Dems take it, the Republicans take it. But when you think about the 75% of states that have already passed cannabis legislation, there's red seats in those states. It's never been easy. We've never, the puzzle pieces of federal legalization have never been more advantageous than they are right now. And I really believe that, you know, after being in the space for 5 years, that the perception has been pushed far enough. We have a fairly progressive and liberal administration in the White House, right? I mean, it's center left, but Kamala's pushing the MORE Act right through the House. You're seeing real efforts and real change, and you also saw a complete vacuum of lobbying dollars against cannabis. The opposition is like, okay, My hands are up. Right? How are you going to fight? Who's like Sheldon Adelson? He's not going to pump in billions of dollars to try to fight a losing battle anymore, right? He's just like, okay, you can't stop it from happening.
You don't really see a massive organized effort against it, right? At least the mainstream one. I don't see that at all. So my friend Eric Stevens does more of a local podcast to Florida and his group is Florida for Care, called We Educate Wednesdays. And we talked about that. We talked about it specifically in Florida because we have Normal and all these groups that are fighting for it in Florida. And I go, Eric, I really, outside of the singular Congress people in Florida that might say something against it, you don't see a massive organized effort against the legalization of cannabis. I don't even think I see it on a national level. So I do this news show on Fridays every once in a while called the Lab Report, and I need to get more consistent with it. Sorry, folks, if anybody's a fan of that show. But, the only thing with the last slate of states that did legalization, the governor of South Dakota came out and she was stark against it, saying that a few dumb things, but one of the dumb things she said was, I've never met anyone who smoked cannabis and got smarter. And I'm just like, well, that's because nobody smart lives in South Dakota, but I try to make jokes. And clearly the people of South Dakota were smart enough to not listen to her. So, who knows how long she'll have a job for, but you don't hear that massive organized effort.
South Dakota, Mississippi, Missouri.
Well, the governor of New Jersey's like, hey, we can do this, folks. Let's legalize. And in the back of his mind, he was saying, let's do this before New York so we can make some money.
Right, exactly. So actually, to that point, so the mayor of Chicago is Lori Lightfoot, and she just came out with a new bill. It basically was a new, I think it was a bill or an action to save several hundred jobs. And it was partially in the bill, it was backed by cannabis revenue. So it's the first bond that's backed by cannabis revenue. And when you look at the way that this pandemic has decimated so many of these densely populated cities, I mean, if you're looking around there and you're shaking your pockets for pennies, how do you not look at cannabis and say, okay, in Colorado, cannabis, or I think it's Washington, cannabis brings in twice as much tax revenue as alcohol. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. It is not inconsequential to these cities, and these cities are going to be desperate. I mean, they already are desperate, but as time goes on through this pandemic, I mean, I just see the pieces and the pressures falling into place, and I see the opposition almost completely dissipating.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about things like social justice too, like, when you talk about job creation, when you look at social justice, if I'm following the narrative correctly, obviously education is a key factor, right? And the lack of access to it. So when Google or when Facebook expands into new territories, like, or Amazon wanting to go to Brooklyn or wherever it is, maybe not Amazon because it was a fulfillment center, but Facebook and Google, there is a minimum level of knowledge or education that you have to have that takes access to get it, right? So it's only a certain type of person that can apply for that job. When we look at cannabis, it's blue collar, it's both white and blue collar jobs. You have marketing and sales and all that stuff, but you also have retail and logistics and agriculture jobs and transportation jobs. You have blue collar jobs that left America that are now back. So beyond the tax revenue, you have job creation, you have an industry creation. And then if we ever get to the point of exporting our cannabis, I mean, the opportunity is endless.
It's immense. It's just incredible when you start to realize all of the harms that it was doing and all of the positives that legalizing cannabis can do. I mean, obviously, I'm extremely biased in this, but I just don't see how you continue the argument. I don't see how the argument persists much longer. I mean, what issue? I think I read an article. It was about it was about gay marriage, women's suffrage, and it was basically, it showed that once the population was about 60% in favor of these civil movements, action was taken within 3 years at the federal level. We passed 60% 5 years. I mean, we're ripe for this. I don't see how we continue to fight. I don't see how you have states like Montana and Mississippi, passing legislation on this, and the federal level's like, oh, I don't know yet. What are we waiting for?
Yeah.
Iowa? Or, I don't, what is what is going to stop this in the Senate? I don't see the Republicans taking that staunch of a position on this on a go forward basis.
No, I can't see that anymore. I mean, it just makes sense because the original reason, and we talk about this a lot, why cannabis was outlawed was not for the smokable form of cannabis or what was deemed the drug, but for what industrial hemp could have done for this country. And that's why, that's what caused prohibition. So literally, the reason that it is still under prohibition was not the reason that it was put under prohibition in the first place, or at least the actual reason why. And now we're at a point in time where all those things that we could have benefited from, 60, 80, 100 years ago, we can absolutely benefit from now. So, up to this point, a lot of what you and I have been talking about have been medical and adult use cannabis. I'm sure you guys are looking outside. Are you all looking at the industrial hemp sector as well too? Because that excites the crap out of me as well.
We absolutely, have been looking at that. I've been following it very closely. I believe in CBD and all of the non-psychoactive cannabinoids. I think hemp has an immense potential as a much cleaner crop. That being said, putting my banker hat on, what you had happen was the Farm Bill passed, and it basically removed all barriers to entry, right? So it was probably the most rapidly commoditized agricultural product in history, right? I mean, you basically went from this illegal thing, and I started in cannabis in early 2016 out in California. CBD was this trace cannabinoid, right? Like, it was so hard to find. It was like people knew about it, and certainly in the community and the culture supported it, but no one grew. Not many people grew large scale CBD, and hemp. Hemp, you have to scale in agriculture, right? If you want to compete with cotton, you just can't do it. It's not a boutique exercise. So what you saw happen is it went from this relative nothing to the whole world was kind of like, oh yeah, let's do CBD. And you just had all these people producing it, all these people processing it, and you just you didn't have anyone at scale doing it. So I haven't seen a single profitable CBD or hemp business. I mean, outside of maybe a small CPG, doing a couple $1 million profitably online, sure. But the Mile High Labs, the Gen Counters of the world, the big CBD players, they're all reeling. They're basically bankruptcy at this point, trying to restructure themselves into something that makes sense. So I do think on a go forward basis, it will be a profitable enterprise, but you're going to have enormous scale. I had a call yesterday with a buddy of mine, John Downs, and he's a co-founder at Asia Horizons. He's doing an enormous hemp facility out of China. He told me a little bit about it. I know high level, but when I think about hemp and CBD, I think massive, right? It's like you got to be doing it at scale and being the low cost provider to the Costco's and the Walmarts of the world, because I've been in these co-packing facilities, the folks that make the products, the GMP certified products for these massive retailers, and it's just an ingredient, right? Like they'll just slide it on in, you know what I mean? You don't need to be a specialty manufacturer to put to nano emulsify the CBD molecule into literally anything. So it's like, I think that yes, there's an immense opportunity there, but it's so nascent right now. I'd look at the big players, anyone who can achieve massive scale, but then you're gonna have to take a huge risk, right? Because you have to invest in a lot of infrastructure for pretty thin margins for at least the foreseeable future until the market shakes itself out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I look at CBD and I kind of feel the same way, but what excites me, and it's not even here yet, is when we get into the plastics and the building materials and the metals and everything else that hemp's going to do for the future. But I know we're not there yet. And I know we're probably just scratching the surface as far as companies coming out, replicating the decortication process and really moving into true industrial hemp. But I can't wait until that happens. That's what really excites me.
So I actually did a due diligence assignment this summer for, it was one of the largest ethanol producers in the Midwest out of Indiana. So I drove like 4 hours in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, and you see it, and you're like, okay, this is big ag, right? These are the types of folks who are ultimately going to win this out, right? Because it's not a limited license, highly fragmented structure, right? It's a completely different ballgame than the cannabis industry. So the only plays that from an investment perspective, from every
Mhm.
other perspective, I'm all for anyone doing making any hemp product, anything CBD. I think it's great. From an investment perspective, though, you got to achieve pretty enormous scale in order
Yeah.
for it to make sense just from a business perspective.
Very cool. No, I agree. So we're getting towards the top of the hour here. So I want to cover one more topic. We
Yeah,
had 5 additional states come online for cannabis.
we sure
I,
did.
the one I am most excited about, and I think is just going to start a chain reaction, is New Jersey. But I'm interested to hear your take on our new legal states.
Of course. So actually, we just I just wrote a piece about this. It's
Let's
on
plug it.
our website, and if you go to our website at sharpca.com, it's on our blog. But without question, New Jersey is the most exciting state of the 5 to pass. I mean, I think that the South Dakota, the Montanas, Mississippi, I think it's exciting because you're seeing the stigma and the perception of this country shift, which ultimately will lead to federal legalization. But from an industry perspective, I mean, New Jersey, no question. I mean, you're talking about unlocking the most densely populated area of the United States, which is the Northeast. New York will feel the pressure immediately. I think you're going to see that it's certainly going to accelerate New York's transition. And once New York and New
Yeah.
Jersey are both adult use, first of all, anyone can just drive in or get into those cities and buy it anyway. So, the states that lag behind will just really
Yeah.
lag on revenue, because I think that the industry as a revenue as a whole, you can get it, you'll be able to get it pretty easily. But yeah, New Jersey is the linchpin for the Northeast. It's 9 million people, and look at the licensure structure. Oh my God! I mean, you've got 12. They're called ATC licenses. 12 licenses for 9 million people in Manhattan across the bridge. I mean, it's an insatiable demand. The only question is, how fast can you build up capacity? Because I think for probably the next 4 years, you're going to be able to sell pretty much whatever you can grow out of New Jersey.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that because we have 22 licenses in Florida, but we only have 400,000 patients, right? It's not a recreational state. If we had 22 licenses in Florida, you're looking at, I don't know, it's like 30 million people, something along those lines. So I'm probably completely wrong. I wish I had a fact checker that I can say, is that right? But we don't have one. It's just me.
Yeah, we got to get like Joe
I
Rogan
need
style.
Yeah, I need like a young Jamie. I have a kid, Evan. He just doesn't ever want to be on camera. So, but he does all the videos and everything. He's great. But no, I'm excited for New Jersey. I think the PATH train is going to smell a little bit differently. But I even think, I don't remember if it was the governor of Vermont or one of the Northeast, maybe New Hampshire, but they said that they should legalize cannabis because during the COVID times, it would prevent people driving to New Jersey or New York and spreading the disease to get cannabis. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
the Northeast is particularly interesting just because you have such a population density, and the states aren't that big, right? So I think, and this is more speculative, but the Northeast might be the first to start to break into the cross-border transaction conversation, because they're just too close, right? I mean, if you have 2 dispensaries that are, a few miles apart, but they're in different states, I mean, how differently can you regulate that? So I think that I think the Northeast is going to be enormous from a revenue perspective. Obviously, which will continue to shift this stigma, add lobbying dollars for the good guys, and not to mention create incredible investment opportunities within this space, which I think is so important right now. After the last couple of years where the cannabis industry kind of went through, I don't know, financial puberty, if you will, and is trying to get its feet underneath it. When you start to see high revenue, highly profitable businesses flow up to these multi-state operators and these public companies, you're just going to see better fundamentals, more institutional capital. I think that it accelerates the Safe Banking Act, right? Because actually on Wall Street, right, where the financial capital of the world is, cannabis is going to be everywhere. So I think New Jersey is easily the most important state, but I also think it's fair to mention Arizona. Arizona is another really attractive state. I mean, it's obviously great news for Harvest, who's the market leader there, but it's the expansion, from the west and continuing in. I mean, you look at the map, which, by the way, I'm putting together a map which will be on our website in about a week that goes over all this information, kind of a deep dive on each state. But
sharpca.com, everyone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for the shameless plug. But yeah, I think that when you look at the states and you look how many states have turned green, it's just hard to imagine that the federal level can't respond at some point, especially now that you have a federal administration that is favorable to looking at it, right? And is at least discussing it. With Trump, and everyone always said this with Trump, like, oh, well, you never know, right? Because he's so mercurial in nature, right? Maybe one day he's just going to wake up and say, fuck the Democrats and I'm going to legalize cannabis and take it. It was just kind of a long shot, right? I mean, I think you really need to start the conversation, because the one thing that I know from working in the space for so long is that even when you decide you're going to do it, then you have to answer about 1,000 questions about how to do it. So you can't just say, oh, well, yeah, we'll do, fine, we'll go ahead and do it. You have to open the up for debate. Everyone's got to weigh in. I think even if, let's say that the liberals and the Democrats win Georgia, we have the House, the Senate, the presidency, and Kamala twists Biden's arm and says, we're legalizing this thing federally. If they all decide to do it, I think it still takes 5 years to implement.
I don't think I disagree with that.
I mean, they're going to go through and say, okay, we're going to do this. It's going to take them a year to put together the appropriate legislation for whatever the Congress looks like. And then they're going to vote on it. They're going to amend the hell out of it. It's going to be enacted a year or two, year and a few months later. And then you look at states like Illinois, my backyard, they released their licenses. I mean, we passed this in 2018. It's almost 2021. We haven't awarded a single retail or cultivation license. We're talking about a state, not a country. We're talking about 12 million people, not 330 million people. So, I just think that this is going to be such a long, drawn out, fragmented process. And it's ultimately going to leave so much opportunity for folks who want to get in this space. So, whoever's listening to this, if you are interested in the space, there is a plethora of opportunity. Bring your passion, bring your skill sets, help us build this thing, because it's not going to build itself.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. So let's let you do the shameless plugs one more time, where people can find you, find the stuff you write, and then let's get out of here. Yeah.
So Sharp CA, which is sharpcapitaladvisors.com, is where you can find more information about us. My contact information is on the website under the team page. Feel free to reach out to me. Love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, we're going to have you back, man. Love keeping in touch with you. Glad we got around to doing this. I know we had to reschedule from last week, but this was awesome. Thank you, everybody at home, for watching. It's always fun to be in front of you. Join us tomorrow, 6:30 p.m., facebook.com/Cannabis Group. Of course, you can see the entire library of our recordings. I think we are somewhere between 93 and 95 of them released. We're going to have something special for our 100th episode. What that is, I still have not fathomed, but that will happen soon. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind, and we will see you tomorrow.